Tempo ECC OT 200 course. This is the second of what's probably going to end up to be 3 lectures online here to finish up this whole psych rehab process stuff. The first one that I did earlier in the day today kind of continued and reviewed and did the psych rehab readiness stuff. Now we're going to be moving on to diagnosis. Diagnosis phase of psych rehab includes creating an overall rehab goal, the functional assessment, and a resource assessment. So let me start the slideshow here. Again, I remind you that I'm doing this from home, so unfortunately I might have a dog come up and bark or something, or my son who's in the process of trying to go to sleep. He's watching his tablet, or wife, different stuff like that. I will pause it as needed and just restart it. Also, I'll be pausing it and restarting it every so often, just to allow the computer to work on the rendering of the screen, because it'll end up being a little bit of a lag time if I don't. So again, psych rehab process, diagnosis, composed of the overall rehab goal, functional assessment, and resource assessment. It refers to kind of creating a picture of the consumer's overall rehabilitation goal and their present functional strengths and deficits related to the ORG, the overall rehab goal. Say 3 different activities. We set the rehab goal, conducting a skill assessment, and conducting a resource assessment. Really, most places you're going to see that are very client-centered, consumer-centered. This is just going to be part of the treatment plan itself. For example, in my setting, the overall rehab goal is the very first thing on the treatment plan, and the skill assessment, resource assessment part, it's not listed out on our treatment plan, but it lists the barriers and the strengths for the person, which includes their skill barriers and strengths and their resource barriers and strengths. This may be in some places a regular assessment form itself, but again, it's really one of those things that is up to the individual practitioner on exactly kind of how it's done and stuff like that. The overall rehab goal, kind of the definition, it's determining the preferred environment in which the client intends to live, learn, work, or socialize, and kind of what they want out of treatment. The purpose is, of course, to direct the focus of all rehabilitation activities. Some people say if it's not in the overall rehab goal as part of the goal, it's not something you should be dealing with, and maybe another practitioner should be dealing with that. The activities in terms of creating a overall rehab goal involves identifying the personal criteria, describing alternative environments, and choosing a goal. Some of the unique features of the overall rehab goal: it's part of a systematic process. It's part of the psych rehab process, and it's one of those things that kind of comes after the one step, and it's often something that isn't just, hey, what's your goal? It's much more of a, hey, how can we work on this? What are your hopes, dreams? Why is it important type stuff, and it should be a collaboration between the consumer and the practitioner, but in the end it's really a self-determined goal by the consumer, and our part is to help with the rational decision-making process, not being dependent on us or intuitive in nature. Another unique feature here, as you see, it precedes assessment. Okay, so although we were doing what some people could consider assessment type stuff in the rehab readiness stuff, it's that rehab readiness stuff is not really considered a true assessment in terms of the overall psych rehab process. It's it's the kind of, are you ready for it? It's almost like a screening, if you wanted to put it in perspective of the overall OT process in a way. And a good example is even at our facility. On the first visit, and the first 10, 15 visits that most people have, I don't sit down and do a regular assessment asking about XYZ and this and that and whatever. It's kind of, hey, what are you looking for? You know, what do you think are some things that you'd be good at? Why do you want that? What do you think is your commitment? How do you, what are some steps you might make to commit? All this type of stuff. So the focus is on the individual's values, preferences, and choice, the environment's type, and characteristics. So here are some examples of ORG statements. I will be a student at the ECC OTA. I will be a student in the OTA program at ECC by September 2015. I intend to work part-time. But you'll notice for all these, they have a date. They are I statements. It doesn't say consumer will or Charlene will. It's I. That's part of the first person process, is putting it in their own words and not making it kind of a third person thing on a treatment plan. The whole treatment plan is really all in their own words. And it's also very specific, like we have here, a DePaul Treatment Apartment Program located on Ontario Street. A member of the Williamsville Country Club. So they're written in the consumer's perspective, I statements that convey intention or actions, stay or go or create. They're environmental and role specific. They indicate a time frame. As we've talked about a couple different times, traditionally no more than 24 months. And they're realistic and achievable with work by the consumer. Now you kind of come up with the thing of, well, what if their initial goal and what things they say are unrealistic? Then it's kind of a catch-22. You need to have it in their own words and personalize. But if you can't rationalize them to a more appropriate goal, you'll still put that goal that might be a little irrational, unrealistic on the plan, but part of your duty as the therapist is, as they continue along in treatment, hopefully to get them to rationalize more that, hey, this plan might not be appropriate. So
we'll ask them.
So the overall rehab goal, again, it's identifying personal criteria, describing alternative environments, and choosing a goal. This is a process, setting an overall rehab goal. It's just not saying, well, I want to do this. And it'll help make sense some of the readiness assessment stuff in terms of the environmental awareness and self-awareness and stuff like that as we go along and you kind of see what happens. In actuality, it's kind of, you make a graph and you make a kind of a checkbox with different things, and you have to kind of go through it and make the understanding of what's the best appropriate choice. So, identifying personal criteria that focuses on the individual, the consumer's self-determined standards for the future environment. What are the values? How do values influence our likes and the choices we make? And how can we help someone clarify, think about, and articulate their values? So, identifying personal criteria steps, we clarify their values. We deduce consumers' preferences for future environment. And we're going to infer their potential criteria for the environment. So if they say they value privacy, it could be via the value could be privacy, and then the preference is I want to have time by myself, and a personal criteria is privacy space. So in that kind of grid that I mentioned a little bit, there's going to be literally a thing that has privacy space that's going to look at all the different environments. Unfortunately, I don't think I have an example of that grid. That was one of those things I was going to remake and just draw on the board. I'm actually going to pause this here, let it do it, and try to look for it, and I'll come back in a second. Okay, I set up what I wanted to do here. So, continuing on here, identifying personal criteria. Some examples of personal criteria: private space, convenient location, affordable rent, wanted supports. Note that all these personal criteria have an adjective and a noun. The adjective reflects the underlying value, so the thing that's kind of intangible. The noun reflects the tangible thing. So I'm going to kind of minimize this here. End show. Okay, and I'm going to jump to a Word document here. This is kind of a example I'm building here of the kind of graph that would be done as you're talking and doing these things. So you see this column here is the different personal criteria, and after all these personal criteria are filled out, we're then going to be assigning it a number value and stuff, and then we're actually going to be putting another number value in these different places, and then be adding things up. So let me go back to the slideshow here. Okay, so the overall rehab goal, describing the alternative environments. We're investigating actually the real world and collecting information about the consumer's possible choices for a space to learn, live, work, etc. Okay. From current slide. Okay. So what we do is we're going to brainstorm a list. Then we're going to list the different characteristics that are relevant and needed to be described in order for accurate research on the environments. We're going to research the alternative environments by gathering data through interview, observation, reading literature, etc. And we're going to describe the relevant characteristics of the environments. So some relevant characteristics might be number of people per room, number of residents who share a bathroom, proximity to public transportation, cost of rent and utilities, rules governing residents, staff relationships, and the characteristics. So in terms of choosing a goal, we're selecting the environment that most closely matches the consumer's personal criteria and find the best possible match in consumer satisfaction. So again, the steps, which we kind of talked about the first couple steps here, is you're defining the personal criteria in terms of measurable, and then determine standards for rating the alternative environments. We're going to weigh each personal criteria according to how important it is for the consumer, and develop a decision matrix to compute the preferred environment, and then determine the best environment and set the overall rehab goal. So going back to the Word document here, so this would be the actual matrix. Here are the personal criteria. Of course, this isn't properly done here. We had affordable rent, which should be, and like amount of support. Affordable spelt wrong. Whoops. Okay. So now we're going to be assigning a value to each of these. Most of the time you're going to have more than 3 different things here. You could have 4 or 5 different things. So weighing each personal criteria, we're going to think of, so we're going to ask the consumer, so out of these different things that you want in terms of where you're going to live or the place you're going to work, what of these personal criteria is most important for them? And we're going to assign a value between 1 and 10. So like affordable rent might be a value of 10, where it's very, very important. And so high numbers it's more important, low numbers are barely important. Private space, maybe that's a 5. And the amount of supports might be a 2. Because where the supports aren't really important to them, the biggest thing is kind of having affordable rent, some privacy. Let's add one more thing here, closeness to bus. Did I spell closeness right? Yeah, I guess I did. And this might be a 7. So now we're going to go back to the slideshow. So we've listed the personal criteria on that part of the matrix, and we've put a weight in terms of each one of them. Sorry about that. That was my dog with a little whine. Sorry about that. So, defining the personal criteria. Okay, private room, which means the number of residents who share a bedroom or bathroom. The weight, 1 times, this is going to be 1 to 10. Standard or rating, and you're going to assign a value. So +2 is no other residents share a bedroom or bathroom. +1 is this. 0 is that. -1 is that. -2 is this. And you would do this for each of the different items. So if we were using this as an example over here, you would have one for private space, you would have one for affordable rent, amount of supports, and closest to the bus. And have that +2 to -2 scale on each of them. Here's another example in terms of wanted supports. The weight, as you see here, is 9 times. It lists each of the different things of meets a lot, meets minimal, meet none, different stuff like that. Okay, and this is where we would then go over to the matrix and we're going to look at the different places and actually ask all those different things. And for each one of these we'll use our numbers, and let's say for place number 1, private space, it has a 0. Affordable rent, it might have a +2. Amount of supports might have a -1, and closeness to bus is a 1. What you would actually do then is you're going to multiply this times that and get a number. So these would then equal different things. So 5 times 0 is 0. 2 times 10 is 20. 2 times -1 is going to be -2. Then 1 times 7 is going to, of course, equal 7. And then you would add up this whole column. So this whole column is actually worth 25 kind of points. And you would do this with the other places. So let's say this one was a +2. This one was a -1. This one was a 2. This one was a 2. This one was, let's give it a 2. This one was maybe a 1. This one was maybe a 0. And this one was a 2. So this would be 2 is equal to 10 then. If you multiply it out, this is equal to -10. This would be equal to 4. And this would be equal to 14. Then you would add up this column, but so this 10 and this 10 kind of would cancel each other out. So this would make the total column for be 18. This one here, you would have 10 here. 0 times something is always 0. So this one times 2 is going to equal 2. And 2 times 7, this would, of course, equal 14. So you add those together, 24 divided by 26. So after doing this matrix and assigning the values to each one and looking at all the different weight of each of the different personal criteria, you have these scores here. So in terms of this score, if we look at all three of these independently, this one here would be the score that would probably be the best choice based on us assigning the number values and everything else. But at the same time, this is one of those things where some clinical decision making needs to be made where, well, is this one actually going to be better because of the amount of money? And that would be something you would talk about in terms of when you'd make the rehab goal. And then the rehab goal would be something such as, I will move into place 3 by X date. Does this really happen in most clinics? No. Most of the time the creating of the rehab goal isn't as structured as this, but in terms of the psych rehab process, they say that doing this type of a matrix and assigning all the values to the personal criteria help make a more informed decision, and sometimes can help a consumer understand, especially someone who is got a goal that's way out there, understand and reality test a little more. So that's kind of creating the overall rehab goal. The next step in the diagnosis phase is performing a functional or a skill assessment. So kind of the definition, developing and understanding the client's functioning and the critical skills needed to be successful and satisfied in the ORG environment. So the purpose is we suggest the skills needed to be developed to be successful and satisfied in the chosen environment. And we would, of course, list the critical skills, describe skill use, and evaluate skill functioning. The focus is on the individual and what they will feel satisfied in terms of into the chosen environment, and what the individual has to do to be successful. Again, the 3 steps there. So listing the critical skills, we're going to focus on the individual, naming the most important skills that the client needs to be satisfied in the environment of choice. And then we're going to focus on the environment, naming the most important skills that the client needs to be successful with for the environment of choice. feel like I just repeated this in the last slide. So describing the skill use, what are the skills, the details, how often the client needs to be able to do something, the essential, critical essential skills, and the environment specified in the goal. So if you were to look back at that number 1, 2, and 3, we decided we chose number 3 as the potential goal area. We would talk and look at, so what are the skills that are needed for the person to successfully move into there and be satisfied for themselves and have success based on the environment standards. So that might be consumer X has to pack a 2-week supply without any mistakes and be able to name all their drugs. Maybe they'll have to be independent in money management and paying their bills. It can be a variety of things. When we describe skill use, there's kind of some sub-steps. We define the specific behavior and the observable action of the skill. We describe the circumstances under which a skill should be performed and the frequency that it has to be done. So here's an example. Requesting support means that the percentage of times per month Mike asks to speak with a counselor or friend when he feels suspicious. And this, so like another example might be, let's take the thing of being able to manage their finances. And managing finances means being able to independently pay bills on time to all creditors without prompting or assistance from the housing counselor. So in terms of evaluating skill functioning, the focus is on measuring the highest skill level at which the client can use the critical skill. Then the method is designing and implementing checklists, logs, structured interviews to determine if the client performs the specific behavior at the appropriate circumstance and the necessary frequency. There are 3 levels of skill functioning. You will need to know these, kind of like the back of your hand, especially for the examination. There's spontaneous use, prompted use, and performance use. So this is the definition of spontaneous use. It's that the consumer can do it independently without any supports, independently execute the skill and behavior at the needed frequency, in the desired circumstances, within the required environment. So right behavior at the right circumstance and at the right frequency is spontaneous use. So there's no need for maybe prompting or it's done right. There's no reason the client doesn't need to work on this. This might actually even be a strength of them. Okay, so spontaneous use. After spontaneous use, we have prompted use. Can the consumer do it in the right setting and situation at least once? If there's no evidence that they can at least do it once properly, then it's going to fall to the prompted use. It's execution of the skilled behavior in the described circumstances within the environment specified in the ORG when prompted. So the right behavior plus the right circumstances when prompted equals prompted use. Then we have performance use, as if they can even do it at all. Okay, If there's any evidence the consumer has any trace of abilities in clinical or simulated environments, active performance of the behavior outside of the environment specified in the ORG within a role play or situation. So right behavior plus role play or simulation equals prompt performance use. Make sure you know these three types of use for the test. So resource assessment. This is kind of the final portion of the diagnosis phase, developing an understanding of the existing supports that are critical to client success and satisfaction in the ORG. Purpose is to determine in an objective manner to the degree to which the supports are needed and presently provided. And activities is listing critical supports, describing resources, and evaluating resource availability. So that is the entire diagnosis section. So in the diagnosis, we set the overall rehab goal by first the values and the types of things they want, creating that whole matrix thing. And then we do a functional assessment of how good can they do it, prompted use, spontaneous use, or performance use. And then we conduct a resource assessment of what is it they have and kind of what is it they need. This will be the end of this little lecture, the diagnosis section.